Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's webinar with Informa Connect and Peter Hoffman. Our subject today is linking governance, risk management, and compliance frameworks for business sustainability. Before I introduce Peter, I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping points to enable you to go through this session. Firstly, we'd like to ensure you that you will be receiving the recording of this session post-webinar. When the webinar is over, you will also have a poll there that we'd like for you to fill up. And of course, if you have any questions during the webinar, please do not hesitate to type them into the question box that you see on your panel there. And all questions will be addressed by Peter at the end of the webinar. So without further delay, let me just go into introducing our subject matter expert, Peter Hoffman. Peter is a professional business management consultant with over 20 years of experience in business skills management, training, facilitation. Peter has successfully facilitated various courses in the MENA region for over 10 years now. Peter is also an established trainer, senior associate trainer with Informa, having spent 15 years with us training around the GCC region. Following his graduation, Peter started his career in corporate financial services environment, where he established and built up successful departments focused on operational and executive management, as well as board liaison, over a period of almost 20 years. Peter currently is the Executive Director of MFX Options and Solutions, a South African-based consultancy established in 2004 and has globally based clients. Peter's client base has included clients from around UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and around, of course, other regions. Projects undertaken by him have involved international clients and have involved facilitation of GRC frameworks and operating models to support business sustainability. His wealth of experience within this environment provides him a basis for incorporating meaningful, practical examples within his training courses that he facilitates with us. So without further delay, I'd like to hand over to Peter. Over to you, Peter.
Hello, Delna. Thank you so much. And good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for taking your time to join me in this afternoon's webinar. And as Del rightly said, the webinar addresses linking GRC frameworks for business sustainability. Now, I'd like to start off and talk very broadly around what GRC is. Now, traditionally, in a lot of companies, governance, risk management, and compliance have always been addressed in three separate business unit or divisional areas, with the focus primarily on operational aspects of the business. To give some perspective, governance has up to now focused very heavily on aspects that include things like policies and procedures, and ensuring that policy and procedure is well communicated across the organization, and to ensure that the necessary business processes are put in place and adhered to. From a risk management perspective, many businesses continue to manage their risks in terms of operational risk reviews and report to their risk committees and ultimately their boards on key operational risks. Compliance, on the other hand, which includes areas like assurance providers, being internal audit as an example, focus very heavily on ensuring the effectiveness of internal control structures that are put in place. Now, when we have a look at GRC as a concept, the integration of governance, risk, and compliance, we elevate these three areas to a strategic level within every organization. And the elevation to a strategic level, the key purpose of this is to drive higher levels of effectiveness and efficiency in those three key areas. Of course, today's webinar is restricted in terms of time, so my information will be brief, but I'll welcome questions at the end, should you have specific questions around the aspects. I'm going to start off very broadly and talk about risk management. Risk management from a GRC perspective, and please, when I use the word GRC, I immediately imply strategically focused and integrated. So risk management from a GRC perspective is focused on trying or on establishing a risk governance structure that allows boards and executives to focus the business activity on those risks that are key to achieving the longer-term strategy of the business. Having said that, I think it becomes evident that risk now moves from a focus on the operational aspects of the business to more a strategically focused risk management function. Risk in itself incorporates the area of opportunity management, so it is not only around identifying the potential negative impacts that risk have to businesses, but also how organizations can use opportunities that present themselves within the framework of risk to the advantage of driving strategic objectives in the medium to the longer term. Substantially, risk and opportunity management then forms the foundation for formulating strategy within the business areas, and the governance focus, as opposed to merely looking at governance from a policy, procedure, and process perspective, now moves to an area where governance frameworks start being established that align with the strategy of the organization. To give you a very simple example, if an organization is focused on managing growth within its operations over a medium term, being 3 to 5 years, the question that gets asked is, well, what governance frameworks do we need to establish to be able to support driving that growth going forward? And those governance frameworks now start going into areas like, what will the marketing strategy for our organization be? What will our human resource strategies be to be able to ensure that we have the skills base and set in place to be able to drive that long-term growth? Likewise, what are our IT requirements? What are our operational requirements? And so it goes on. It spans across the entire organization, and this takes governance to a level where, as opposed to a function managing pure policy and procedure, it now becomes an organizational governance aspect, which makes the environment somewhat more complex. The second concept that's important around governance is that the frameworks that get established to align with those risks and opportunities that are considered key to the organization. Higher focus gets put on the governance aspects that are relevant to driving the strategy, and there is, where it is feasible, a reduction in effort around those governance aspects that are not key or critical to the organization's success and organization's sustainability. And by ensuring that the focus remains on the strategically focused risks and opportunities, and there is a reduced effort on the less relevant aspects of governance, it drives higher levels of efficiency within the governance frameworks within business environments. The last aspect being the compliance aspect. Compliance traditionally, as I said, has been focused on internal control assurance provisions and measures. We now take compliance to a level where compliance now starts providing higher levels of assurance around the effectiveness of the governance structures that have been put in place to drive those key opportunities and mitigate and manage those key risks that are critical to the organization's strategy. And by doing this, we are effectively starting to integrate those three areas, and hence this integration in terms of, on the slide, these little arrows. So we are integrating these three areas of governance, risk, and compliance to be able to drive strategic objectives and to be able to ensure that companies are better placed to achieve their longer-term strategies. Now, when we have a look at GRC and business sustainability, and for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to use the business model and external environmental influences just to give a broad outline of how how the GRC framework influences business sustainability. Here we have a business model, and this business model is primarily focused around a business drawing on inputs, and those inputs would be inputs like human resource inputs. We need people, we need money, we need raw materials, we need services from external providers. All of these things constitute inputs into our business where we have business activities, and this in essence is the entire business structure. Those business activities will be structured based on the needs of each organization and its strategies, and it incorporates its operations, its marketing, finance, IT, etc. All the functions are within this area. Business activities result in outputs, and those outputs fundamentally are what the business produces or what service it provides. On the other hand, we have outcomes, and outcomes is somewhat of a broader concept. So a very simple example is a business that would be providing consulting services. The output of that business is the consulting service it provides. The outcome of that consulting service is value addition to its client base, and clients now being able to drive improved efficiency in their businesses through the consulting services they've acquired. Now, within this business model, there are two aspects that are relevant. The first one, which is this blue circle that we have over here, is the governance framework. And when it comes to the governance framework, we start with risks and opportunities. As I said earlier, risk and opportunity is the foundation for strategy formulation in an organization. So businesses look very clearly at how they govern risk and opportunity management. And here already we can start seeing that from a board and an executive level, very clear understanding needs to be in place around how risks and opportunities are managed within the business. And sorry, I have a quick request here. Can I repeat the output and outcome? So on the output and outcome side, as I said, if I am a business providing a consulting service, the output that my business has is the consulting service itself. So I provide a service to a customer. The outcome is the broader outcome within a macro context. So if I provide a consulting service to a client, and that consulting service is how they can improve business efficiencies, the business efficiency improvement in the customer's business is the outcome from the service I provided. My business doesn't benefit directly from that, but the client's business benefits, and that benefit has a macro environmental impact in the broader sense. I hope that that quick output outcome comparison answered the question. So back to my risks and opportunities. That's great. So back to risks and opportunities. They form the foundation, and we need to clearly understand what governance structures we put in. Those risks and opportunities, once analyzed, get used to be able to determine what the broad-based business strategy and lower-level strategies in the business are, and how resources need to be allocated within my business to be able to provide the services that are required whilst driving the longer-term direction of the business from a strategic perspective. Having implemented strategies, it now becomes necessary to look at performance in the business. And the word performance is a very broad concept. I will use a simple example. I trust most people understand the basic fundamentals of scorecard systems. So if a business had a balanced scorecard in place, that scorecard would incorporate key performance indicators that allowed the business to monitor its performance across multiple areas. Key performance indicators, of course, measure not only financial performance, but also performance around aspects like our customers, our business processes, and the business's ability to be innovative in terms of driving future sustainability. Now, that performance structure that gets established needs to be established with a very clear understanding of what the broad-based strategy is, and based on the resources that are allocated in the business, how we need to monitor performance of those resources in terms of how they are driving the overall strategy that has been put in place. The other aspect that's relevant is to look at the longer term outlook for the business. So whilst performance is being measured, and we know that performance generally tends to measure lagging indicators, lagging meaning that if I am measuring profitability, I am measuring profitability as at the point of today. But measuring profitability does not give me a clear indication as to what my profitability will look like in a year from now. If we think in terms of outlook, we then need to ask, well, what are those indicators, the leading input indicators that need to be put in place from a performance management perspective to be able to give an indication of what the future outlook looks like, so that we can then continuously monitor our strategy in terms of, is it being implemented effectively, and does that strategy need to be adapted in any way? So again, a very quick question that's popped up, and that is giving a practical example of integrating these factors. If I may, I'm going to use an example of a retail environment. So we take the Middle East, I'll just look at the UAE, and let's say we're looking at Carrefour as a business. So Carrefour looks and it says, well, what are some of the risks and opportunities that are relevant to my business? One of those risks will be the risk associated with technology change that is happening within the retail industry. As we're aware, aspects like automated cashier functions that are coming into place. Popping into the store, scanning your products, and when you get to your cashier, you have an automated system that simplifies and makes cash out more efficient. So the risk is that if we do not keep up with technology as Carrefour, our competitors may potentially impact our business. In conjunction with that risk is the opportunity of utilizing technology to our advantage by implementing a strategy that allows for the progressive uptake of technology within our stores across the UAE. So, based on those risks and opportunities, we now formulate a strategy that is focused on including technology advancement. That strategy then results in resources being allocated to ensure that the right people and the right resources are put in place to be able to drive the progressive technology change that we want within our business. And having done that, from a performance perspective, we need to have a look at what performance indicators we will put in place to measure and monitor how effective we are at implementing technology change within the Carrefour business environment. At the same time, we look and say, well, what on a continuous basis is the outlook related to technology change? And the reason that it's important to continuously review this, as we know, technology changes at an exponential rate and it is changing on a continual basis. So whilst strategy is generally formulated on a year-by-year basis, we would want to monitor throughout the year what the technology environment is looking like, so that if there are material changes, we can adapt our strategy and adapt how we allocate our resources to be able to ensure that we are continuously at the forefront of technological change. I hope that that answered the question. Perfect. If we go one step further, we need to consider the external environmental influences. And this is where, from a GRC perspective, it becomes more relevant. So within the business, as I mentioned earlier, businesses are focused very heavily on the business activity area, or alternatively put, the operational area, in terms of driving their governance, risk, and compliance functions. When we start looking at a strategic perspective, the external environment, which is more relevant from a strategic perspective than the internal, starts playing a larger role. Around external environmental influences, I'm going to cover 4 of those very briefly. The first area is political influences. Political influences can incorporate aspects that relate to things like legislative and regulatory environments. So as government implement new legislation or regulation, that is an influence that impacts on the business and how the risks, governance, and compliance structures get established. Then we have economic influences, and those relate to macroeconomic aspects around the regions we operate in, and it can go as far as global economic aspects. The third one is the social aspects, and these aspects would be relevant to the society within which we operate, and where stakeholders become very prevalent in our businesses. And the last one is technological. Now, looking at this, I trust that you will see that I'm using a basic pest analysis approach towards looking at environmental influences. There are many ways in which environmental influences can be considered. I'm just using a pest for purposes of this webinar. In the next few slides, I'm going to take current examples of these, just to give you a little bit of perspective of how these 4 environmental influences influence the GRC environment. So let's start with technology. And for technology purposes, I'm going to use the concept of the long-term aspects of artificial intelligence and workforce automation. And again, I have a quick question here. Can we consider this as an external factor? Could I just ask the reputational aspect? Can we consider the reputational aspect as an external factor? So yes, most certainly it can be considered. And the reason why reputational aspect is very prevalent from an external perspective, is because it is our reputation with broader society that determines whether our business remains a sustainable business or not. It is society that determines whether they choose to continue to do business with us, because ultimately it is the end customer, and that is society. So yes, certainly reputation is an aspect that is highly impacted from an external perspective. I hope that answered that briefly. Back to the long-term impacts of artificial intelligence and workforce automation. And here I'm drawing on a bit of research that was done by McKinsey Global Institute, where McKinsey had a look at what the impacts of technology would be, technology uptake or AI and workforce automation within workforces over the next 15 odd years. This was done from research that was collected over primarily the North American and European environments, but remains very relevant to a global perspective. As you can see, the research works in terms of the billion number of hours that are worked in 5 core areas, those being physical and manual skills, basic cognitive skills, higher cognitive skills, social and emotional, and technological. The blue circles indicate the 2016 number of hours that was spent on that area. The gray, which as you can see in physical is within, is the amount of hours that are anticipated to be spent by 2030. And what we can see from this research is that in the area of physical and manual and basic cognitive skills, there is an anticipated 14–15% reduction in the time that will be spent in those areas, whereas in the 3 that follow, there will be an increase. Specifically within the area of technological skill, we see a 55% increase in the amount of time that will be spent on this area in the business. Now, the simple reason for this is because we have continued automation and artificial intelligence playing a role within the environments we find ourselves. Physical and manual skills will reduce over time as machines start replacing the work environment. Very interesting, the example I used just now, the example of Carrefour, where cashiers will, over the next 10–15 years, most certainly be replaced by automated checkout systems that use artificial intelligence and that use automation to drive those processes. Now, what McKinsey's research does show is that whilst there will be a reduction in certain areas, it does not imply that the workforce will reduce. In actual fact, their research indicates that workforces will grow, the difference being that the people that fall within these areas will have to be skilled to be able to transfer them into the other 3 areas. If we look historically, a very simple example, IT as we know it today, 40 years ago, IT made up an extremely small portion of any business environment. Today, IT accounts for probably 20% of most business environments, and businesses haven't grown smaller because of IT. It is a change in focus on what is done. Looking at 2016 to 2030, what we need to understand is this is a long time frame. It's 15 years, and this has long-term implications for business. So from a GRC perspective, tying that in with this, it is around identifying, well, what are those key risks that are associated with artificial intelligence and workforce automation in as much as our businesses are concerned? How will AI and workforce impact us? How will it change our working environment? How will it change the environments of our supply chains and our customer bases? And it is using the risks and using the opportunities to be able to formulate the strategies that address those key risks and that draw on those opportunities. Some examples that I can use: our IT strategies. So looking at our IT strategies and saying, what development do we need to include in our strategies from an information technology perspective to ensure that we drive the infrastructure that we need in the medium to longer term to support the sustainability of our business. Very simple example in the IT environment is businesses continue to advance in terms of how they interact with their client base. Clients generally now have the ability to communicate through portals with their suppliers, and those portals are driven through IT infrastructure. So this is looking at our business and saying, how must we drive IT going forward to ensure that we adopt artificial intelligence into our IT infrastructure to drive customer satisfaction and to drive business sustainability. From a human resource perspective, given the fact that artificial intelligence and workforce automation are going to change the work environment, and it's very interesting to note that based on current technologies that are already available in the areas of automation and artificial intelligence, the research done by McKinsey shows that already 30% of 60% of all work done today has the potential to already be automated. So from a human resource perspective, it's looking and saying, how do we need to adopt HR strategies to be able to ensure that not only are we placing ourselves in a position where we can drive the skills and learnership development programs to be able to transfer the skills base in the areas of physical and manual skills, skill people up to be able to transfer them into the new jobs that will be created? How do we need to adopt our recruitment strategies to ensure that we drive recruiting the people that we need over the medium term to drive long-term sustainability of the business, ensuring that we have the technological skills in place, etc., etc. And technological skill implies not only skills in the area of IT, programming, etc. It means IT skills across the workforce as a whole. As we know, the majority of our workforces are dependent on one or other level of interaction with IT-based infrastructure to continuously do their work and to be able to communicate within the business. As I've explained how IT and HR will be impacted, so too functional level strategies will be impacted. Functional level in terms of all functions across the business. Marketing strategies and how marketing interact with their customers in terms of how artificial intelligence is brought into the marketing environment. Operational strategies in terms of how our operations are impacted. And so it carries on throughout our business. And all of these strategies address how the business is governed from a board and a leadership perspective. So what direction should the board be giving to management to be able to ensure that the strategies are put in place to drive all the aspects related to the adoption of AI and workforce automation? And I see another question popped up. How can we measure innovation from a strategic perspective? Now, unfortunately, I don't have too much time to answer this, but I'll give you a very simple example. If we in a business implement a learnership and development program, we will then incorporate key performance areas within the learnership and development environment to understand how the learnership and development environment is driving improvement in internal business processes. So now we're linking the key performance indicators in the innovation environment, which is a learning and development, with internal business process efficiency measures. And in that way, we ensure that we are measuring innovation to be able to drive business process, to be able to drive strategic objective achievement. Great, we got it. And so too, marketing strategies. And all of these, as I said, are dependent on having key governance structures in place. Governance structures being how the business is given direction on what it should be doing, and how, from a performance measurement and assurance perspective, what the compliance functions are looking at to ensure that the processes are operating effectively. I'm going to stop there on the technology aspect. Now I'd like to talk from a political perspective. And for this purpose, I'm going to use, given that it is extremely current, I'm going to use the oil price trend example from a geopolitical context. So geopolitically, if we have a look at 2019, 2019 was marked by the impacts of the trade wars that existed between the United States and China. And those trade wars were driven by political influence. So very much a political or geopolitical impact. It drove growth rates down, it dampened trade between countries, and it had a big impact. Likewise, we now have the oil price trend. And if we have a look at oil price trends, in June 2018, the oil price was approximately $148 per barrel. And that oil price in the 12 months, going backward 12 months, March, April of 2019, the oil price, as you can see in this chart, floated in the area of $65 to $75 per barrel. And economic influences and other concerns have influenced that price over time. And in March, and that was as recent as a week or so ago, OPEC Russian oil talks, which were focused on trying to control oil into the market in terms of supply and demand, those oil talks failed. And as I'm sure everybody is aware, Saudi Arabia announced material reductions in oil prices. And the purpose of that was primarily, from a Saudi perspective, to drive consolidation in the oil market. And this is a very good example of how political influence impacts the environment. March 2020, the oil price was estimated to hover around the $30 to $35 level. And it's very interesting to see that with other influences, specifically being the impact of COVID-19, which I will talk about just now, other influences, we can see that the oil price today dropped below $30. So Goldman Sachs are already forecasting that this average $30 per barrel is going to falter and continue into the second and third quarters of this year. So what does this mean? Well, what it means, and it's very interesting, if you have a look, Aramco have already made an announcement that they are going to make material adjustments to their cost structures, in essence, cut costs to ensure that they remain highly profitable within an environment of a $30 per barrel oil price. And when companies like Aramco cut costs, it impacts on the economic well-being of the economy as a whole. And I speak now from a Saudi perspective. As an example, When companies like Aramco cut their costs, they invariably start cutting costs with their supply chain. So now the suppliers start getting the pinch, and the impact filters from companies like Aramco all the way through the first tier, second tier, third tier structures of their supply chain, and those impacts can be devastating. So what do we do? Again, it's understanding, well, what are those key risks that are associated with the geopolitical influences? How does the oil price at $30 or below, how does that impact on our business? What are the risks of that reduced oil price to the economic well-being as a whole? And how does that economic well-being or the impact on that well-being influence my business? What are the risks and what opportunities may be associated with that? And from a governance perspective, it is now imperative to start looking at how we incorporate this changing risk and opportunity environment into our strategies, and again, how we adapt and adopt different ways of measuring performance, and how we adjust our compliance structures to continuously monitor how effective these governance and performance measurement structures are operating. I'm now going to move on and I'm going to talk about the social environment. And again, being very relevant to where we are, I'm going to use the SARS-CoV-2 virus situation, which, as we know, is causing the COVID-19 disease. I'm going to use this as an example. So COVID-19, as we know, it started in December 2019, and it was centered in the province of Wuhan here in China. By the 9th of March, and this is based on World Health Organization statistics, by the 9th of March, we can see how COVID-19 had spread widely across North America, South America, the Australia region, Europe, and Asia. Very interesting to note that Africa at that point was less impacted, and that's purely due to the fact that travel into the African region is a lot more restricted. Now, if we move by 1 week, so from 109,000 cases, first quick touching, so what's relevant with COVID-19 is not how it's spreading, but the exponential rate at which it's spreading. And in the period from the 9th of March to the 16th of March, here we can see the 9th of March. At that point, there were under 5,000 cases per day being reported, and that is just exponentially growing. Interesting to note that it is primarily within the European environment and the Eastern Mediterranean environment where that growth is occurring. And we are now pushing well above the 10,000, 15,000 cases per day level. And that exponential growth from the 9th to the 16th of March, within 1 week, we had 60,000 new cases of COVID, and that's an increase of 55%. Interesting, if this is not managed well, at a 55% growth rate per week, exponentially, the entire population of the globe, that being 7.8 odd billion people, will be infected within a 6 months time frame. Also interesting to see how across the entire North America and very much spreading into the African region, how this virus has been growing. And this is the very reason why we find that a lot of effort is being put into trying to manage and control this virus. Travel bans being put in place. A lot of countries already have shopping mall closures. Schools have been shut down. Everything in an effort to contain the virus being spread. And all of these things have a material impact. Here we have a document issued again by McKinsey that shows how across the America, Europe, the Middle East, China, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, and globally, how they predict COVID-19 is going to impact on global growth rates. So here you will note there is a 0 to 6 level on their charts, this being the percentage growth anticipated. So pre-COVID-19, which is the black dot, pre-COVID-19, there was anticipated growth in America of just under 2%. Here we have in the Middle Eastern region 2%, China 6% growth, etc. McKinsey talk about two scenarios, a quick recovery and a global slowdown scenario. Quick recovery being whereby at the end of the second quarter, the virus is totally contained, well controlled, and we are back to normal. Global slowdown is where the virus continues to impact across 2020, and you have a global slowdown and potentially, or very much probable, a recessionary environment. If we have a look at the Middle East, interesting to see that under the quick recovery scenario, it is anticipated that Middle Eastern growth is going to drop by 45% to just over 1%. Under a slowdown scenario, the impact is going to be quite vast, 74% drop in the anticipated growth for the Middle Eastern region for the year. So what does this mean? Well, this means that all businesses are going to be impacted very heavily. As I mentioned earlier, we've got restrictions on travel bans due to COVID-19, and this is growing by the day. We have countries like KSA over here that have placed total bans. It's basically excluding anybody from entering, and those, of course, have extended into countries like Italy, where, as we know, this is the epicenter of COVID in the European region. So, again, from a GRC perspective, it's around understanding what the key risks are that are associated with COVID-19. How does COVID-19 impact my business? And how do I need to address the risks and the opportunities that exist by looking at my supply chains, my human resource strategies, functionally and marketing-wise, to adopt governance structures and monitor performance base and ensure that my assurance functions are looking at the effectiveness of these governance structures and performance management structures. And this, as opposed to the example I used with AI, where AI is something extremely structured over a 15-year period, this is an extremely dynamic environment that changes literally on a daily basis. A very simple example, just for perspective, a human resource strategy around COVID-19 would relate to something like ensuring that you have a well-established and structured communication strategy in place to continuously communicate with your staff around what COVID-19 is, driving employee wellness, controlling employee fear. Supply chain strategies are ensuring that your supply chain isn't negatively impacted due to operational shutdowns that are happening with your suppliers. A lot of suppliers come out of areas that currently have bans in them, and it's starting to become very difficult to get supplies out of those countries. So here we have a nice simple example of a current, and that being almost a black swan environment, a black swan event that is impacting us, and how we need to adopt our governance, risk and compliance structures. Now, that was a very broad outline. Of course, this is covered in a lot of detail in the GRC course that is offered. And just to give you an idea of what is offered in the GRC course, the GRC course, upcoming courses, cover in a lot of detail what concepts, guiding principles, and elements of integrated GRC frameworks there are. So going into great detail around how we establish those frameworks and how the integration between those frameworks works. Linking those frameworks with business strategy, performance, and sustainability, and that goes into covering areas that look at business competitiveness and sustainability in the longer term. the macro environmental influences that exist within the environments in which we operate. We incorporate a bit of strategic modeling and how that modeling gets incorporated with the governance, risk, and compliance environment, and look very carefully at how performance is monitored on an ongoing basis. Governance frameworks and operating models, which form the backbone of good integrated GRC systems. We go into that in a lot of detail. And I also cover the key concepts that are relevant to good risk management frameworks, that incorporating both the risk management at an enterprise risk management level, which incorporates the strategic level risks, and opportunity management. And then lastly, looking at how we can establish effective compliance structures within our businesses. So spending a lot of time covering in great detail all the elements from a governance, risk, and compliance perspective, and how we integrate those elements at a strategic level to be able to drive longer-term sustainability in businesses. And for your info, there we have some detail on the upcoming GRC courses. We have an online course running from the 19th to the 21st of April. And there are scheduled courses at this point for August and December of this year, the dates as provided. I look forward to seeing some of you at these upcoming GRC courses, and it's been an absolute pleasure having the opportunity to share a little bit of information around GRC with all of you that attended today. And at this point, I'd like to welcome any questions that anybody may have. All right, here I have a question. The question is, in the slide that included the business model, a differentiation was made between outputs and outcomes. And again, just an explanation of how these impact the governance framework using a practical example. So again, let me use the practical example of the oil price environment. So if we have a look at a business that is dependent on oil, let's say an Aramco, Aramco would use inputs being their materials, people, etc. Their operations would be the production of oil and gas products. Their outputs would be the products themselves, the actual oil and gas products. The outcomes would be how those products are used to be able to drive energy across the world based on energy requirements. Now, where the link between these two becomes relevant, and this is where aspects like a current COVID-19 situation come in. You have COVID-19, which is negatively impacting on business activity. It's resulting in a shutdown in many areas. That shutdown implies that there is going to be a further reduction in the demand for energy, less travel, etc. So in turn, Aramco, in terms of what they, as an example, Aramco as an oil producer, their output will be impacted due to the fact that the energy requirement on the outcome side is reduced. So what do we as Aramco do from a governance perspective? Is we have to ensure that our frameworks incorporate measuring aspects such as continuously monitoring regional demand for oil on a day-to-day basis, monitoring how that demand is changing and how flexible or dynamically that change is happening, and what the outlook is based on the future, so that we can, on a day-to-day basis, not only monitor the production volumes that we are pushing out as an organization, but also adopt the strategies that are necessary to ensure that our production, both in the shorter and the longer term, is adapted based on the needs of the customer bases, or should I say, the global need in terms of energy as a whole. That was a very brief response, but I hope that that responded to that question. Any more questions? Very good. And thank you for the thanks for the good session. I appreciate the kind comments. Del, at this stage, can I hand back to you? All right, great. So once again, I'd like to say thank you so much to all of you that took time out today to join me for this session. I truly hope that you found, as brief as it was, I hope that you found it informative. I believe that the area of governance, risk, and compliance is an extremely complex area, and it warrants, of course, a lot more time. I really look forward to seeing some of you at upcoming courses going forward. And again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And to Delna, I'm going to hand back to you at this stage.